think one of the things that was helpful is that there are several periods during that chapter in which the camera is taken away from what Derek Chauvin is doing. We were able to talk with some of the eyewitnesses. We were able to interject some moments and memories of Floyd that help put context to the situation, that I think helped universalize the experience in a way that didn't make it seem like it was just pornographic. Like for me, that was a very important thing. And I wish there was preternaturally a discussion about how in local media, how to portray these images of George Floyd, which I feel are disturbing and also distracting to the actual point that the anchor or the person is trying to get across. Quite frankly, I'm stunned that we still have to have these conversations, but we still are having them.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add, like, very quickly, I agree with everything Robert said. And I think it one of the reasons George Floyd's death was so reverberated around the world was because people consumed the video and were moved by it. It just so happens that that's how much of society works, that if there's a video, all of a sudden it becomes, this tragedy. If there's not a video, then, we move on with our lives. So we had to grapple with that as journalists. And we grappled with it as we were turning the scene of his death into a print production in which we described what was on the video. I actually didn't watch the video until I had to sit down and grapple with it in order to try to write that part of the book, in part because, I knew enough about these experiences, these killings, to kind of get a sense for what happened from reading about it, and there is a certain trauma in watching Black death over and over and over again at the hands of a state agent. And whenever there's a chance to watch, the latest killing, I tend to, turn away or scroll away and just, I read the Chiron, or I read the newspaper story about it and get a sense for it. But, the actual process of going through watching someone lose their life on camera, I think, is something that as journalists we have to grapple with, especially, I'm from the print side, but, especially in the TV world, where those images are, part of the story. It's part of the power of the story in some ways, but it also can be, as Robert said, it can be awkward, it can be exploited to have them rolling over and over and over again. So that's something that I think we're still grappling with.
Okay, Natalie, is that it? You have another one, or is that it?
No, I mean, my follow probably, I mean, I'd love to hear from the group later, maybe when we do, because I wonder if there's best practices or whether they're changing, like it just seems like the tragedies keep getting more gruesome. And so there's calls for people to say, hey, we need to just show all these victims, like, in Texas. And so I wonder where the group is on, like, are these best practices changing? Like, I know with my son, I remember when the Alton Sterling thing came out, he was completely traumatized. And he came and he's sitting in his bed and he's watching this video and then he had to go to school, So it's like, I don't know. I just feel like this might be a moment for us to sort of, like, while it was absolutely critical, like George Floyd was a portal, and there's before George Floyd and there's after George Floyd, and the video had everything to do with it. But I just, I'm wondering, like, how we're sort of grappling and how we're grappling with this as professional journalists. So
yeah, we could talk about this more because I want to make sure everyone gets to the question. But I mean, I completely agree with you. And I mean, after Sandy Hook, which I helped to cover, I had suggested that, like, collectively journalism needs to rethink how mass shootings are covered. One, for the actual trauma that having, a flattened media structure inflicts upon a community, but, like, also thinking about how to actually carry it out. Like Tolu, after covering the Alton Sterling murder, I was done. I had no interest in doing it all over anymore. I felt I had done my part. So I do think there needs to be a wider discussion about that.
Terry, are you still here? I see your picture, but not you. Okay.
I
Oh,
am.
you are. Well, is this a problem? Is this an issue for people on radio as well?
The discussion of how to portray trauma and death is, I mean, it takes different forms, but the question's always the same. Are we serving the audience? Are we re-traumatizing people? And are we shortchanging the story? And, you know, it's the questions get more and more urgent every time we have this. I think what Natalie is referring to is the recent discussion about whether we ought to be showing pictures of the victims in Uvalde, because, you know, it's been said that parents couldn't identify their kids because they were so, well, you know what I mean. It was so hard to identify them, and whether that is the thing that needs to happen for this debate to move. I am firmly in the camp of we can't re-traumatize people. But I understand the argument that feels like, I mean, if you've seen it, and I mean, I think we've all seen this, right? The closer you get to it, you know how it affects your thinking about this. In radio, we have the debate about the Floyd tape all the time. I mean, yes, you see it, but in some ways, when you hear it without seeing it, it's at least as gripping. And if you've seen it and then you hear it, you know what it is. So yeah, we debate this all the time. The question now is, it is part of the story. It's a powerful part of the story. Do we need, you know, years later to be retelling it in the same way? And the answer is clearly no. But that is a powerful piece of life-changing tape, and it's hard to get around not using it.
I hear you. Okay, now speaking of children and the effect on children, Caroline Brewer has got a new children's book about this episode, and we want to ask Caroline what questions she has. Caroline.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Robert and Tolu. This is my copy, and I'm working my way through it. I really appreciate the conviction that you've shown in reporting this story in such a powerful and moving way. And I can say it took me a long time to watch the video. I think I've only seen it once, but the description in your book, even of the moments leading up to Chauvin coming on the scene, were enough to make me put the book down and just really take a break from what was happening. So we know that a picture or video is worth 1,000 words, but the right words can also convey the kind of impact that we hope a tragedy such as this might have on people. So thank you for that work. As Richard said, I'm a children's book author. I'm a literacy consultant and activist. I've spent the last 20 years working with numerous schools and thousands of children. And so when something like this happens, I'm always thinking about what's the impact on children? How are they processing this? How are they experiencing it? And what kind of community supports are there for them? And so I think the most important child in this story is George Floyd's daughter, Gianna. So I'm wondering, did you guys get to talk to the family about her? Did you get to talk to her? And then there was the 8-year-old boy who testified at George Floyd's trial, which I thought was so heartbreaking that he had to be called as a witness, 8 years old, to have to recount that. And I think that spoke to the racism that's in this country, and that's a part of the criminal justice system. There were many witnesses, adults, really mature people, but it seemed as if the defense felt that they needed the testimony of this child to help make the case. So could you guys address his daughter, other children in the community?
Yeah. So the community as a whole is, I mean, when you speak with folks who live in the area about the incident and what has happened since, I mean, you see a vacancy that comes in their eyes that is not unlike any other traumatic experience, any other traumatic mass shooting that I had covered. It really struck me. And it's very sad, you know, and one of the reasons that the prosecution had to put a child on the stand is because there is a statute in Minnesota that if harm is done to a child, the sentence is higher. Of course, the judge concluded that the children and teenagers who had encountered this were not traumatized because they were laughing, as you know, and you can do with that what you can. As to Gianna, we did not speak with Gianna for the book. We tried. You know, the lawyer, you know, there was a time when it seemed it would happen, and then ultimately it didn't happen. You know, it's a sad thing. One thing that we tried to keep in mind as we went through the course of this story is the fact that, you know, as a family, and we spoke with a lot of people in the family, there's also a young girl that, you know, we wanted to be sure that if she was encountered or confronted with some of the material in the book or that could have been presented about her father, that it was accurate, that it was fair, that the family knew what we were talking about, that they had a chance to talk about it if they wanted to. Sometimes they did, sometimes they did not. But that's one of, I mean, that was all a part of our process. And of course, you know, everyone who we spoke with and spent, you know, a good amount of time with who was related to Floyd also had Gianna in mind when they were putting answers to the questions. You know, one of the interesting conversations I had was with my nephew, who's now 13, about whether he was ready to go through the pages of it. You know, Black boy. And you know, my family and I, we kind of debated it for a little bit. It sort of feels to me that if you had someone who was willing to read and you've already had a discussion with them about what can be as a Black person in America, particularly being a Black boy, then it might be worth it. But it might also be worth it to be able to have someone to chat about it with, to have that kind of discussion. And I'm sure a lot of these things are questions that you're wrestling with your children's book too. I mean, it's really hard. But, you know, I think for me, there are just these guiding lines of truth and delicacy that we try to walk throughout the pages. And we hope that would be good enough.
And I'll add just very quickly that, you know, as journalists, you know, we are known for, you know, we as a profession are known for being dogged and not taking no for an answer and getting the story no matter what. But there was a need for sensitivity and delicacy and empathy in reporting this story, especially when it came to children. So there were some people, some sources that we went back to over and over again after they told us no the first time and said, oh, we're still here, like, let us know. And there were some where, you know, when we spoke to their guardians or the people representing them and they made clear that it was something that might be too traumatic for them, we figured a way to get the information in a different way or to leave that information out because of the sensitivity. So that was something that as journalists, we wanted to be very sensitive to, that even though we were reporting a lot of this story more than a year after Floyd died, that because people had to grieve in public, those wounds were still very raw, and you know, some people were still processing his loss and his death, and we didn't want to re-traumatize people. So we tried to figure out other ways to get the same information or question ourselves about whether that information was that relevant that would require us to go after that information from someone who might be traumatized by the process of reliving some of those things.
Okay, thanks. I want to ask Jennifer, as an incoming editor, what you make of this, of what they've been talking about.
Well, I am so inspired. There's just so much to think about. I think I was really struck by that point that Tula made about, we cover people, like we need a news peg, right? We cover people when they're dead and it's too late, like there's so many interesting stories to be told, before that point that we really need to be telling. And I think trying to figure out how to tell it in a way that isn't, I think right now, a lot of times when I read coverage about systemic injustice, sometimes it is missing like the humanity and the people and the things that would make it really compelling. It might be a lot of stats or something like that. So trying to find that balance of how to tell these important stories of what people are going through and to bring in that nuance and that humanity early on is going to be like part of the big work for all of us, it seems like to me.
Exactly. All right, Natalie has another question.
Oh, yes, I put it in the chat. I was saying, like, I saw this tweet and they said George Floyd died and all we got was they got rid of Aunt Jemima, and which is very flip, but it's true. Like Du Bois was trying to get rid of Aunt Jemima before, the 1800s. So yeah, it's a big deal that she's gone. But I wondered what some of the takeaways were, like what did change fundamentally? Like what, when you guys are sort of cataloging what the impact on society is, where do you guys come from?
So, I mean, we got a little bit more than Aunt Jemima. 16 states either banned no-knock warrants or chokeholds. And some of the questions of the cultural that fueled the cultural wars, were suddenly settled. It's amazing how quickly a flag can come down. But then you have to sort of look at the things that were raised up in absence, right? Like this current conversation that we're having about CRT or critical race theory, the book bannings, the concept of legacy Americans, what that means, the continued spread of replacement theory, and the just vociferous backlash that we're encountering now, that's based on a fear of what happens when the truth comes out. So I think right now we're kind of in an in-between moment. Throughout the course of the book, I mean, we follow the family beyond the Policing Act, beyond the breaking disintegration of the Policing Act, and into the discussion about voting rights in the country. And, the question that we asked to them and everyone else is sort of like, where are we? What does it all mean? And the last chapter, which talks about one of the one of the most improbable responses to systemic racism being a unique type of hope, an American hope and optimism that's based on the fact that thinking of the alternative for Black people in this country is far too bleak. We talked to Jesse Jackson and we asked him, what he makes of it. And he told us that you really have to consider like the long arc of history to make the case. Like you cannot just say, this happened in 2020, it's 2022, nothing has changed. You have to look at 1619 to 2022. And when you look at it from that sort of like larger perspective, you see things in a way that's a bit more positive. And the other thing that Al Sharpton said to me that, was really important to recall was that after the March on Washington, the church got bombed in Birmingham. You had the 4 girls who died in the church, and that it had taken 9 years between Rosa Parks and the actual passing of the Civil Rights Act. And so I think sometimes in the midst of it, you could lose kind of the more grandiose picture about what's happening. And sort of like the pride that we have as journalists is to be able to put things in the proper context, to be able to like do all the accountability stuff and all the recognition that we need to do, in hopes that, you know, you can help to dismantle some of these systems. But fundamentally, I walked out of this feeling more hopeful about the way the country is heading than less hopeful.
That's good. All right, Eric Deggans and Darlene Superville, and then Mary Curtis. Great.
Hey, you guys.
Hey, Eric.
How's it going, man?
Good seeing you.
Yeah, it's good seeing you, and great to see this book, which is an amazing achievement. One of the things I wanted to ask you guys, and I came in a little late, so forgive me if this question's been asked already, but it feels like the systems that sort of enable all of the oppression and the brutality that we've seen against Black people, it's almost like it has a what do I want to say, an immunity system where there's a, you know, George Floyd's death was a shock, and I think it got a lot of people to pay attention. But not too long after that, we saw the system sort of reorganize and try to explain away what happened. And we saw Tucker Carlson saying that he didn't die of asphyxiation, and we saw other people trying to justify what happened to him with all these sort of ludicrous justifications. And now it feels to me like there is a serious cynicism and pushback against all of the ideas that people kind of accepted in the wake of George Floyd's death, in particular, the impact of systemic racism on people of color and how toxic and harmful it can be. And I just wonder, as you guys are rolling out this book and you're speaking to people and you're doing public events and things like that, are you sensing that at all? Are you sensing that there's less, that some elements of the population are less open to having this conversation than they were maybe right in the wake of his death? And how do you deal with that? Given that, you know, I think the impact of his death has faded for some people, and it's harder to get their attention and get them to focus on these issues, which, you know, admittedly have been with us for a very long time.
Yeah, that's a really insightful question, and something that we are in the midst of grappling with as we put out this book and as we continue to think about the kind of journalism we want to do going forward. It's unmistakable, undeniable that, you know, the zeitgeist that was evident after George Floyd died, with this big coalition of people coming together, coming to the streets together, white suburban voters, Black activists, people from different backgrounds, not only taking to the streets, but also helping to elect the president. You know, some of that coalition has broken up. There's disillusionment among some people about not enough getting done. There's also this backlash that you talk about, you know, and we write in the book about this idea of Newton's law of civil rights, where whenever there is an action, there's an opposite reaction, reactionary forces who don't want us to be talking about systemic racism, who don't want us to be grappling with the issues and injustices of the country's past and present. And we're seeing that live, and there's a long history of it. And as you said, it's sort of an immunity machine that it's almost automatic in this country's history, that there is that backlash. And, you know, we're dealing with that as the country, as Robert says, deals with, you know, things like great replacement theory starting to get some kind of mainstream support, different, you know, cable news hosts that are getting, you know, great ratings based on, you know, spewing a lot of the hateful ideology that, you know, people marched against when George Floyd died. There is this backlash, and there is this sense that maybe, you know, we talk too much about race, or George Floyd's death to, you know, spark too much conversation about race. And that is in some ways sadly to be expected, because there's a long history of that. But I think our role as journalists is to keep pushing forward, keep enlightening people, keep providing information, and hoping that the more light is spread on an issue, the more information is put out there, the more people are able to grapple with these ideas, the more change happens over time, even though, you know, there are, you know, fits and starts in the broad sense of progress. So that's our goal. There are times where it seems more realistic than others, and there are times where it's easier, there's times when it's harder. I will say that the reception to this book has been largely positive. There's been a lot of people willing to engage with the themes that we engage with. There's been less of the negative, but there has been some of the negative, and people kind of going into the old tropes that, you know, George Floyd died because he was an addict, and, you know, focusing on the worst parts of his character, and focusing on, you know, the parts that people say are responsible for, you know, the inequalities, you know, essentially respectability politics and things like of that nature often, you know, have cropped up. But I do think that things have changed since 2020 in a way that some of the things that we are able to discuss in the book, I think there's a more willingness to at least engage in those subjects, engage in those debates than there were, even as there is part of the culture that's saying, you know, let's just forget about, you know, talking about race. Let's move on. What's in the past is in the past. So we as journalists have a role to play in not just letting the conversation move on, but allowing, you know, the process of learning, the process of enlightenment to continue through what we write and how we write it and how we approach these issues, that even though they're longstanding issues, they're worthy of constant exploration, constant journalism, constant writing and reporting on, because they are manifesting on a daily basis in the lives of millions of people, even though there is this sense of like, let's all move on, or let's just leave these people behind. You know, there are people that are still dealing with the issues that George Floyd dealt with in his life. And I think it's our work as journalists to make sure that those individuals, those communities get coverage and get focus and get our attention, just the same way that, you know, diners in, you know, in the Midwest get attention and focus. So I think it's important that we cover it all.
Yeah, and to put it head on it, I mean, the three biggest criticisms that we get, and sort of these are the responses that, you know, I would give, is one, George Floyd was no saint. Why are you writing about him? You know, the response to that is, well, no one alive is a saint. You know, George Floyd was a man, like we're all men. And that is meritorious enough. That was meritorious enough to get people protesting. The second one is, it's too sad. I don't want to traffic into this book because it's too heavy, and we don't want to go there. And the truth is that if some of you have read it, I mean, George Floyd himself is not a sad man. He does not approach life in a sad way. And there's a lot of warmth in this book. And I think this book is ultimately not about tragedy, but about the persistence and beauty of Black people. And I think that's one thing that we try to make sure that people know. And the third thing is, who cares? Like, you know, like, he's dead, Derek Chauvin's in jail, like, why can't we all move on? And the truth of the matter is that this is about George Floyd, but it's also about the millions of other people who are like George Floyd, who are in crumbling school systems, who can't get proper treatment for their medical issues, who live in crumbling housing, who never get the chance to be seen as a fullness, in their fullness and with all their nuance. And if you're interested in those people living, then you have to understand the systems that killed them. And I think all three of those things are important.
You know, I had one other quick follow-up.
Well, no, sorry, I'm sorry. Put it in the chat if you would.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah. Darling Superville.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, guys. Hi, Tolu and Robert. Congratulations.
Hello.
Two quick questions. One, I was just wondering, is what part of George Floyd's life, is there any part of his life that resonated with each of you or that you could identify with as you were doing the research and the interviewing and the reporting for your book? And two, was Darnella Frazier among those that you interviewed, because she was so central to the story and the case, the trial, the prosecution of Derek Chauvin. I wonder about her often and just wondered if you all had a chance to speak with her.
Yeah, I can do the second question first because it's a little bit easier. Darnella, we had been in contact with her lawyers throughout the process. There was a period where she was going to participate. We were actually hours away from speaking with her, and then one of her uncles was run over by a cop and died. That sent her. So in terms of how she's doing, what I can say is, it's still hard. She did, I think when older people see what she did as an act of heroism, but for Darnella Frazier, it was an act of being a teenager, right? Something is going on the street and you record it and you put it on Facebook. That's what she does. That's what she did. And sort of like having that dissonance is very hard for her. But we did speak with her lawyers a lot. At one point when she's in a space that's a little bit more comfortable for her, I think you'll hear from her, but not a lot. It's also important that we did not center the death around Darnella Frazier. While she was the impetus for it, there are other videos that were taken that day, and there are other witnesses who are important to the case, who we did speak with. And so one of the things we wanted to do was to put it in the proper context, that like a lot of this was spawned by Darnella Frazier's video, but Darnella Frazier's video alone could not prove the case for the prosecution. The second thing, the two things that resonated with me about George Floyd was, one, he was a writer. In the book. You get to see sort of the introspection that he put into his writing and his relationship with faith and his own body. Those come from his words that are depicted. We have parts of his writing in the book. And the second was his relationship with his body. And I think that's something that a lot of Black men share, knowing that like your very silhouette, your structure can be seen as something that can be boosted, that can boost you in a particular context, in George Floyd's context on a football field, but in every other way, every other place, there's a lot of going to and fro and apologizing and trying to make sure that people understand that you're not a threatening or a mean person. And those are things that, really struck me. Like George Floyd knew that and talked about it a lot. And so those are my two.
Okay, Mary Curtis? Mary Curtis, yes, okay.
Let me unmute here, thank you. You answered some of my question when you were talking with Eric, but congratulations on the book, on the fact of pushback. But I wonder if you would comment on the timing of this book at a time when you talk about police reform, and we've seen with the elections coming up that there's been a really pullback on issues of police reform because it's turned into talking about crime and an increase in violent crime, and a sense that you can't have policing that's both fair and effective. So that's kind of been pulled back. And then when you talk about systemic racism, and speaking of race, so many school districts and from kindergarten to higher education are now having actual laws against speaking about or even mentioning the history of race in this country and how systems work, just like they did in George Floyd's case, as your book points out, from a failing education system to an unfair criminal justice system. So just if you can comment on how you're handling these questions about the book in the context of what's going on right now with actual pushback when it comes to policy.
Yeah, that's an insightful question. And we had no idea that when the book came out, sort of what the political atmosphere was going to be like around policing or crime. We were reporting this book while the policing bill was still being debated, so we didn't know what the outcome would be. And we've covered Washington and politics long enough to know how things work and how things fall apart and how things get politicized very quickly. And one of the things we wanted to do in this book was to go through the history of some of the war, the quote unquote war on crime, war on drugs, and how there's been decades of propaganda and this push on the need to reduce crime and reduce drug use, and how that led to mass incarceration, militaristic policing, and the decimating of entire generations and entire communities through incarceration. So it was important for us to put it within the context of what's happening in history. And I think that helps us to have a conversation about what's happening now. It's not just a snapshot of what's happening in the moment, but it's part of a long history of the use of punitive policies to try to control people and control crime, and the kinds of crime that is seen as needed to be controlled, the kind of drug use that is seen as, worthy of punishment and worthy of police activity, and the kind of drug use that's worthy of, not so much. There's a scene in the book where Robert reports on one of George Floyd's, his last girlfriend before he died, who happened to be a white woman. And one of the quotes she gave was that, she's used drugs, she's sold drugs. And the reason that she doesn't have a record and George Floyd has a record is because she's a white woman and he's a Black man. And she said that in her own words. And I think that's some of what we tried to capture in the book, is sort of the disproportionate and disparate approaches to policing and approaches to the crime issue. And that helps us understand where we are now. We haven't gotten as much questions, and a lot of the times where we're asked specific policy questions, we let people know that we're journalists, and we can't really weigh in on specific policies, and so people haven't really asked us why we wrote something a certain way about policing or about crime, because we've been able to say we're not policymakers. It's not our role. There's no policy prescriptions in this book. We don't end the book by saying that these policies should be changed in so and so way, or these crime laws should be changed. So that's, I think, shielded us to an extent from some of the political debate over the crime and over policing and police reform. But it is an issue that we address in the book because it's important for people to know the context of these debates over crime and the debates over policing, because there's a long history and there's a long context that we thought was important to include as these debates are happening in real time.
Do you see the same things playing out in the debate over how history is taught? Since you bring up issues of systemic racism, I'm sure people are learning things for the first time.
Yeah, and we have, even as I say, we don't make policy prescriptions. Like, we are very firmly on the side of providing information, providing education, providing historical context. So, to the extent that any policymakers or states are like wanting to ban books or ban journalism or ban journalistic projects like the 1619 Project, like, we can firmly state that we believe that journalism should have a place in our society and it shouldn't be censored. There shouldn't be censorship taking place. And I do think that's part of the context, is that when we are allowed to learn about our history and learn the full story of the country's past, the country's strong points and the dark points in our history, it complicates things for people, and it makes things more complex. And some people don't want that complexity. They don't want that nuance. It's our job as journalists to introduce that nuance, to make sure that information is put out there. There's one of the people in the chat talked about the historical part of the book, where we go back into George Floyd's ancestry. It's important for us to relive and tell those stories because they get lost to history so easily. People say slavery and sharecropping was such a long time ago, and they can't connect it to what's happening today. And one of the things we wanted to do in the book was, make that clear connection between George Floyd, who came into the world in 1973, and his ancestors who came to the world in 1820 and 1857, and all the way up and through how that led to how that racial terror that they experienced during the time of slavery and Jim Crow impacted George Floyd in a very real way. And that's one of the things we wanted to do in showing sort of how the American dream plays out in different families with different perspectives. And it's, there's a sense of, let's forget that history. Let's not talk about it. Let's not teach it. But I think as journalists, it's important for us to grapple with that history, to make sure that it's in front of people and make sure people know about it as well.
Thank you. And congratulations again on an amazing project.
Okay, Hazel, I need our last question before the introductions. Hazel.
Okay, thank you so much, Richard. Just quickly, I wanted to make the observation that when George Floyd was murdered in front of all of us, there was a strategic moment in America, and that was when everything had already shut down because of COVID. And so I've always thought that a part of the reason that George Floyd blew up so quickly and so fast was because little white children were at home with their parents. And over and over and over again, they would hear George Floyd's suffering. And so I was wondering if if any of those parents or children might have, I haven't read the book yet, but I will, were interviewed as a part of the thinking of America, and also whether you think that things might change down the road because of what those children saw. Just a second question is, how did you all deal with having seen the video over and over again? How did you heal yourself? Or, I mean, how did you deal with that? Did you have to go to a psychiatrist or anything after having watched it over and over again?
I live with a therapist, which is, I'm married to one, which is helpful. But the first part of the question is yes. So a lot of those voices, in fact, they were the first people I interviewed. After George Floyd died, I spent time in Tulsa, Oklahoma with a group of women who were trying not to be Karens, and they were, they had seen children. Some of them had voted Republican, and they were trying to figure out what all of this means. So that's a part of it. I do also think that how encountering this, how they encountered the video, how that will play out in the future of their lives is a big unknown, right? We see horrifying things all the time. That's a part of the American media structure. I don't mean just like journalism, but media in general, boom media in general. So I think one of the solutions that I thought, like when this idea came out and we talk about writing the second draft of history, ultimately what I think about are like, I don't have any children, but my friends' children, my nieces and nephews, those white children who you mentioned, who might grow up with some sort of sense of this, and they can look at the text and have a deeper understanding of what it means. And not just the fact that they or their parents were horrified by a singular incident, but that incident was so terrifying to so many people because of the ways they lived beforehand. Like I tell people all the time that the most terrifying thing to me, well, there are two. One, there's the discussion that George Floyd has before he encounters Sarah Chauvin. He says, why don't you believe me? Like, why don't you believe that I don't want to go into this car because I'm claustrophobic, which we documented that he was. And the second thing is that when he's first encountered by the police officer, he gives a look that is recognizable to so many Black people in this country because they know what might happen if you encounter the wrong police officer. And so when we think about the import of what we hope the book can accomplish, it's having a world understand why George Floyd had that look in his eyes. He understood something about this country that so many people didn't understand. I think that's one of the important things. Tolu and I were both people of faith, and that helps. Being able to live with a therapist helps. But ultimately, and I'll tell you, Hazel, that one of the most affirming things to deal with it was to be with the people who we were around at the time, to be with the Floyds and with his girlfriend and his best friend as they're going through this trial, and maintaining a positivity and a hope that everything was going to be okay. And it turns out that like a part of the solution to reporting about the trauma was actually reporting about the trauma, because they never really missed a step in believing that the country can be better. And I kept on thinking to myself, like, well, gee, Robert, I didn't lose anyone. And if they can still believe in like the future of this country, I can too. And so at every step, I found myself continually being affirmed.
You're here. All right. I think we should, it's time I was wondering if Rebecca was still here. She had to leave, Rebecca Aguilar. But if not, let's give Robert and Tolu our thanks, and then we'll move to the introduction. So thank you, Robert, and thank you, Tolu.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, we got some good ideas, and I expect that some of these ideas, let's hope, will end up in our media. So now for our introductions, please be as brief as you can. just your name and ID, where you are is fine. And if you want to add, except if you want to add something new that we don't know that you're working on, or a new project that's come out, please add that. All right, Eric Deggans, are you ready?
Sure. I'm Eric Deggans, TV critic for NPR, chair of the Media Monitoring Committee for NABJ. Just happy to be here, watching a lot of TV at this point.
Right. Okay.
That's all I'm doing.
All right. Ken Lemon, we know, but you can say it again if you like.
Ken Lemon, senior reporter, WSOC TV, Charlotte, North Carolina, NABJ VP of Broadcast and Black Male Media Project Chair, and also working on a couple of relief funds for NABJ. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. Darlene Superville.
I'm Darlene Superville, White House reporter for the Associated Press. I'm also the treasurer for WABJ, the Washington Association of Black. And also recently co-authored a book with a colleague of mine, Julie Pace. We wrote a biography of First Lady Jill Biden.
All right, very good. Mary C. Curtis.
Yeah, Mary C. Curtis, zooming in from Charlotte, North Carolina. All of my office is in DC, where I am columnist at Roll Call and host of its Equal Time podcast, senior leader with the Op-Ed Project, and contributor to Charlotte NPR affiliate, WFAE.
Thank you, thank you. Beatrice McBride.
I'm Beatrice McBride. I'm a photojournalist based here in Dallas, Texas, and I'm a member of the Exposure Group.
Of African American photographers.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
all right. Diana Fuentes. Can't hear you. Unmute, please.
Sorry, I was trying to be good before. Diana Fuentes, Executive Director of Investigative Reporters and Editors. We're a membership, more than 5,500 members from around the world. We teach data journalism and investigative journalism, and we have our big conference coming up in person in Denver, June 23rd, 26th. We hope to see a lot of you there.
All right.
IRE.org. Anything you all need, we're here for you all.
Okay. All right, Caroline Brewer, do you want to add to your introduction?
Thank you, Richard. Just want to share the cover of my new book. Say Their Names will be out in late August. And so I hope that it will inspire more conversations about what our children are experiencing. Thank you.
Here, here. Okay. Edward Sargent. Eddie Sargent. Uh-oh. He was writing.
Yeah. Hello,
Okay.
everybody. I don't know if you can see me. Hello, everybody. Edward Sargent, former Washington Post reporter, on my way to Annapolis for a soccer game. Former law enforcement spokesman, writing books on law enforcement. And I'm going to start an exploratory committee for a run for public office, Ward 1 City Council.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Bonita Bing.
Good afternoon. I'm Bonita Bing, president of the Exposure Group, African American Photographers Association, located here in Washington, D.C. I'm also the owner of the Talbert and Bing Studios, located in the Brooklyn Northeast section of Washington, D.C. And
Producer of the Zoomcast.
yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chevry
Thank you.
Lassiter. Chevry. Uh-oh, we'll have to come back to Chevry then. Karen Berry.
Hi, Karen Berry, copy chief for Anscape, formerly the Undefeated. And I wanted to express to the two authors how exciting it is just to be this close up and listening to the questions and the answers and reading the insights in the chat.
Jeanette Pinkney.
Semi-retired print and broadcast journalist.
Okay, that was quick and to the point. Angela Dodson.
How old are you? Tell her.
Hi,
Now look at people. When
I'm currently CEO of Editors on Call. Our latest project is my husband and I, Michael Days, are both acting as co-managing editors for Marcom Weekly, which covers PR, marketing, advertising, etc. I'm a published author of Remember the Ladies, Celebrating Those Who Fought for Freedom at the Ballot Box. I'm a freelance editor, ghostwriter, and author.
Thank you, Angela. Hazel Edney.
Hazel, Trice Edney, Newswire, and Trice Edney Communications. I also teach at Howard University multicultural media history and media entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Hazel. John Watson.
I, veteran 20-year journalist, currently professor of communication law and journalism ethics at American University in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, thank you. Sharon Farmer.
Washington, D.C., Southeast.
Okay, Michelle Smith. Unmute, please.
Everybody. My name is Nichelle Smith. I am the enterprise editor for Racism and History at USA Today. My latest project hits CRT squarely in the face. It is called Never Been Told, The Lost History of People of Color. And the intention is to trace all the history of people who are left out of the usual narrative that people are fighting so hard to keep about how the country is created and who actually did the work of it. Take a look at it if you will.
All right, thank you, Nichelle. Neil Foote.
Hello, everybody. Neil Foote, old school journalist, new school storyteller, chair of the journalism board, helping to make sure that this treasure lasts well into the future. And man, next generation, love this conversation today. I'm also president of the National Black Public Relations Society, and the headline news is recently appointed as an associate dean for the new school in Frisco here at the University of North Texas. So more news to come about that. We're looking forward to more conversations on the roundtable. And thank you all for your support. Go to journal-isms.com and we love your support. We'd love to see you come to these sessions and support us. Hopefully we could do some things in person later this year, but this is what we do at Journal-isms. If you all here, because you know that no one else is doing what Journal-isms is doing, and we want to preserve that, and we want to celebrate that and make sure the industry is well aware of the success we're having in telling these stories. Thank you, Richard, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Neil. Brenda Seiler.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brenda Seiler, semi-retired from corporate communications, but I'm also now a contributing writer for the Washington Informer here in Washington, D.C.
All right, thank you. Todd Burrows.
Todd Stephen Burrows. Instead of introducing myself, I want to point out, further want to congratulate the authors, but I want to point out another book that talks about the semiotics of these videos. The book by Marco Montiel and Todd Brewster, Seen and Unseen. So if you're interested in the book that the brothers did from the Post, and you want to deal with the description of these videos and how they're broken down, that's another book to try.
All right, Jill Geisler.
Hi, I'm the Bill Plant Chair in Leadership and Media Integrity at Loyola University Chicago. I'm also the Freedom Forum Fellow in Women's Leadership, heading up the Power Shift Project. But as several of you have talked about being veterans and referencing the next generation, just want to give you something to smile about. On Thursday and Friday of this week, Report for America is bringing 300 of our next generation of its journalists to the Loyola campus for their first in-person gathering since pre-pandemic. And what they've learned is that they can teach lots of skills online and have, but for these young, emerging, diverse journalists, being together with the support of those of us who are veterans, talking about values, talking about resilience, talking about John X. Miller is going to be there doing a session on managing your boss. And so a lot of it will be really trying to lift up this core of tomorrow's leaders.
Thank you, Joe, and good luck with that.
Thanks.
Yes. Let me see who we haven't gotten to yet. Oh yes, Bala Baptiste.
Thank you, Richard. If
if you wouldn't be doing this, it wouldn't get done. So I have to echo what Neil said. Congratulations to Robert and Tolu. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. My name is Bala Baptiste. I'm a professor of communications, mass communications at Miles College, and also chair of the division of communications. And I'm near Birmingham, Alabama. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Bala. Joel Dreyfus.
Hi, I'm Joel Dreyfus, coming from Paris, France. Been enjoying the session. I'm also proud that two people I've worked both with Terence Samuel. I met him when he was a young student at our common alma mater, City College of New York.
Okay.
And I knew he was on his way. And same thing with Jennifer Kho. We worked together in California at Red Herring, the venture capital magazine. And she was, I immediately knew as well, a talent. And I'm glad to see them both making their way through the business.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Corey Johnson.
Corey Johnson, reporter at ProPublica, formerly the Tampa Bay Times. I'm so thankful. This was a wonderful discussion. I got some books to purchase as soon as this thing is over with. I'll be picking up Robert and Tolu's book as well as Caroline's book ASAP. So thank you once again, Dick, for pulling this all together so we could hear this out. And thank you, Robert. I've been a huge fan of Robert and his reporting for years. So it's wonderful to get a chance to hear from the guy directly.
Here, here. And of course, we honored Corey among our Pulitzer Prize winners last session. So you can look that up, and congratulations again to Corey for that. Let's see if we haven't gotten to yet. Kenny Walker, are you still there? I see his name up here, but okay, we'll have to get back to Kenny. And Chevry Lassiter said her phone went dead, so that's why she's not there. But she's our co-producer of the Zoomcast, particularly working with Facebook, and she works with the Washington Informer as well. So we hope that she gets her phone back in order. Alex Foote.
Hello, thank you so much for allowing me to sit in on this. I'm Alex Foote, a proud daughter of Neil Foote. I am not a journalist, so especially appreciative that I was allowed to enter into this very precious space. I just was texting my dad basically line for line as I was reading this, and so he told me about this event. So I'm in New Jersey. I am in the tech space at a supply chain transparency and mapping company. So particularly hot topic these days is helping companies trace their cotton to make sure there's no slave labor in that supply chain. So it has been interesting to see how slavery is still around, especially in the cotton space. I'm also on the leadership team for the National Association for Black Engagement with Asia. So thank you again.
Asia. You mean the continent of Asia?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay, very good. All right, I think that does it now. Eric had a question. I asked him to put it in the chat because we're short on time, but maybe now we can answer that. And also, just to let everybody know, there will be, if all goes well, knock on wood, a copy of all of the chat room comments that everybody will get when this is over. So you'll see all the links in there and the recommendations and the other comments. But Eric, okay, your question.
Okay, yeah, it was you know, we were having this conversation about how explicit we should be in showing these things and how traumatizing it can be in showing these videos. And one of the things that struck me is that the power of the George Floyd video is that it was unedited and it was an unambiguous depiction of the lethal result of systemic racism. Like, it was difficult to argue with that video. All you had to do was put it on. And it seems like the mainstream is requiring that of oppressed people of all sorts to come up with unambiguous evidence
of their oppression before they'll be believed. And I was just wondering if people feel that that sort of thing, trying to figure out how to present these stories in a way that make an impact on the audience and get people to believe us when we say systemic racism is killing us, if that isn't pushing us towards showing more explicit stuff, being more explicit about how we talk about this stuff, and having to constantly reopen our wounds in public just to get people to believe what we're going through, and how do we deal with that if that's the dynamic that's pushing our coverage.
Okay, Robert Otolu.
I'm not convinced that viewing the video was a slam dunk for people, right? Because there's still a good chunk of people who, even after saw it, believe George Floyd died of a drug overdose, or that maybe carbon monoxide was a part of the discussion. To me, it feels like, yes, there's power within a video, and I don't think for something that's as explicit as that anyone would say, don't ever show it. I think when we talk about showing limbs of children who've been severed by an AR-15, it's a different sort of calculation entirely. And ultimately, Emmett Till's mom made that call for what she felt was right for her son. Like, to me, it feels like that sort of decision should be in consultation with like a family and what they need to do. But I do think that it's good for us to move away from the fact that the grotesque nature of the video is the reason why so many people were moved. I think that was a part of it. But ultimately, it did not show to people that racism still exists in America. Like, ultimately, what did was the video in conjunction with everything else that people had done. So yeah, that's where I am on it.
Okay, thank you. All right, and that'll be the last. Oh wait, Bala has one last question. Okay, unmute, please. Okay.
Thank you, Richard. The question is in the chat. It didn't get a chance to get responded to, so I want to know, is George Floyd's life, is it representative of a broken Black community? If so, how is that? But if not, how do you explain that it's not representative or indicative of a broken Black community?
I'm not sure I understand. Is it, I mean, the community, like there's brokenness within the community, but is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that's, for Tilda and me, I think that was the point, right? That, when we go through everything that the Floyd family had gone through, it just becomes so apparent that all these parts of the social safety net that are supposed to help, if not produce a hand up, they weren't working to support him. And in fact, they were actively working against it. One of the most interesting pieces of research that we found was that after George Floyd gets out from prison, and you're still here, Tolu. Okay. After he gets out of prison, 1/3 of the jobs in Texas require a professional license, so you could do it. But because he had an arrest record, he could not get any of those licenses, right? George Floyd in Texas, he couldn't be a real estate agent. He couldn't even become a barber if he wanted to. And so when we start thinking about the ways sort of these communities operate, it's those sorts of things that we hope telling the story would highlight. And also, after he dies, all of these people come out in Minnesota. One of the characters who you meet after George Floyd dies is a woman named Tashira Garraway, whose husband was found dead and disfigured and broken apart with dog bites all over him in a recycling center in St. Paul. And she says clearly the police threw him in the dumpster and did this after they mutilated him. And the St. Paul police said, well, clearly he jumped inside and no one knew, no one saw it. And then a trash compactor came and compacted his body. And these are, you know, these are the dueling, and for more than 10 years, everyone accepted that to be true, right? Because there's no camera saying that it was not true. And so I think, you know, a part of it is when we consider the brokenness, you have to consider like all of these things that happen, and they don't even have to be sort of like stated in the explicit way of, we don't believe that white people and Black people are equal in this country, right? It doesn't have to be that intentional. But what becomes apparent is that there are things that were baked in that continuously hit Black people harder than white people.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. It's been an enlightening discussion. I want to thank again Robert and Tolu, as well as our questioners. Thanks again. You should, the chat room will be available when it's a bit, you know, it should be shortly. And hope to see most of you next month. Thanks again.
Bye.
All right.
Great.